This is really about being free to create what you want your life to look like. We each are our own hero. And how do we take the challenges that come our way and see those as the birth process of us becoming heroic? Can you meet that judgment that ultimately will surface with neutrality?
This is the Wall Street Coach Podcast with Kim Ann Curtin.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Wall Street Coach Podcast. I'm very excited today to have Tom Brammar on. He is the CEO and President of Stackin. It is a financial therapy business with a mission to fix our relationship with money. And I don't know anybody who doesn't need a little help around that, including me. So Stackin's app leverages behavior-based change, cognitive behavioral therapy, and direct one-on-one coaching to help us understand the why behind our money behaviors and build a healthy practice of financial wellness so that everyone can truly achieve their goals and not be stopped, which you guys know I talk about all the time. How are you being stopped? Knowing is half the battle. Tom is also the Vice Chairman of Netguru, one of Europe's leading digital consultancies and a non-executive director of GlobalSource Partners, an emerging market research business headquartered in New York. Prior to this, he was a strategic consultant for a number of high-growth startups and blue-chip firms, having co-founded a business with the Financial Times, built and sold his own mobile technology company. He began his career, though, in the music industry, working with such artists as Underworld, Elbow, Stereophonics, and Tom Jones. Oh my God, my heart beats still. I love Tom Jones. And a bunch of others who are now flipping burgers probably somewhere. That is the short bio on Tom. He has so much more robust descriptions, but thank you, Tom, for coming to my podcast.
No problem at all, Kim.
It's really just I'm so excited about your app, Stackin, because having worked now in finance for 25 years myself, I've always been kind of rocked by the fact that people in the corporate area of finance, those day traders that exist and investors are all around and living based on the market, based on money. And yet very few have ever seemed to indicate to me that they had done a lot of thought about their own relationship to money. What's your experience with what I've just said? Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I mean, this is true in lots of different areas. Humans, we tell ourselves these narratives to kind of make sense of the world. And we carry these narratives around in our heads. And irrespective of how much they reflect reality, we carry on telling ourselves these narratives are correct, right? I mean, if you take traditional economics, I mean, how much of traditional economics has been proven to be absolute rubbish in the past, 15, 20 years, and yet we carry on, like the central banks of the world keep telling themselves that they're in control of this, and I think it's, in many ways, it's kind of the opposite. I think it's unusual to find where our kind of mental models about things actually do relate to reality. And specifically in the finance space, I think, Stacking is kind of interesting in this area. Originally, the business actually started out as a media company. We were producing kind of video, kind of irreverent content back in 2017, 2018 about finance. And in that stage, like nobody else was doing this. It was kind of, if you wanted to learn about finance, you could only go and kind of learn about the traditional finance vocabulary or the stuff that people just didn't connect with people. And we saw this opportunity to kind of talk about finance in a way that people actually talk. Everyone talks about money all the time. They just don't use the terms that the traditional finance providers use. And so that's really where Stacking started out. And it was through that period that we realized that there was this huge amount of kind of interest around finance, but also just complete confusion and kind of an unknown kind of grasp of how money related to people, and really this kind of very broken relationship that everybody had kind of with money and what money meant to them. And that broken relationship can be anything from people who are on the breadline and in the lower income deciles, all the way through to people who earn a lot way above the national average of earnings. And if you look at there was a report out of Bloomberg about a month or so ago that a third of Americans earning to over $250,000 a year feel like they're living paycheck to paycheck. And it's one of these consistent, again, mental models that we have. We tell ourselves, the solution to money anxiety or these money problems is just to get more money. But all of the information you see, if you kind of study this stuff, shows that's just not true. People get more money, but it just kind of like papers over the cracks of their kind of underlying broken relationship they have with money.
Yeah. And that you mentioned that specific stat in one of the Medium articles you wrote about that 1/3, of those 250K or above feel they're living paycheck to paycheck. And then you talked about this really being a health crisis because of the impact it has on our relationships, on our health, on our careers. Like, it impacts every area. What do you feel is the first step somebody could take if they wanted to start to really take a hard look at the stories like you spoke to that they're telling themselves?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, as we dug into this a lot more, you learn that a lot of our kind of belief systems around money are based on things that we experience very early on in life. Most people's kind of heuristics and beliefs around money are formed between the ages of about 6 to 10. And these kind of belief systems get lodged deep in our limbic brains. And there's an analogy here actually with diet and food. If you look at how people come to their relationship with food, which is also another issue that we have, around people's healthy eating and obesity and those kind of endemic situations. Those relationships are also embedded very early on in people's lives. So one of the first things that we ask people to do is we effectively in the application we ask people to take an assessment, because we want to understand which one of those money beliefs is the most prevalent in you. We have effectively different money beliefs that reflect your different ways of looking at money, and it's only really through first understanding that and understanding your kind of what that belief system is that drives your behavior. Yeah. Can you start to
money romance? I got money romance.
There we are. Yes, exactly. And it's interesting when people take that assessment for the first time, they get very, some people just say, "Oh my God, this is me." Absolutely, yeah, you've absolutely nailed it. Other people go, "Well, I don't know," and then they go away and then they go, "Oh, actually, the more I think about that, yeah, actually, that's really accurate. I've done this before. It's kind of maybe, we obviously lay out what that means." And none of these things, it's important to say, none of these beliefs are in themselves bad. Everyone has these things.
Yes.
The important thing is to first recognize that this is a belief that you have deep inside you, and it will govern how you behave with everything to do with money. Your job is effectively to recognize that belief, be able to recognize when it's driving your behavior, and then effectively be able to manage that behavior, manage the way that you behave through that belief. That belief is making you behave in that way. And again, this is something that we feel very strongly about. It's something that's been explored in other fields. I go back to that point about food. If you look at somebody like a Noom, Noom does a very similar thing with a diet and health eating. It says, the reason why, if you've tried these different dieting techniques, the reason why they failed is not because you are a failure or you're a loser. It's because your underlying belief system is preventing you from sustaining that diet, sustaining that thing. And so the first thing that Noom does is it says we have to effectively rebuild your relationship with food. We have to think to think about food in a different way. Once we rebuild that relationship, then we can start to give you more structured guidance about, okay, well, maybe you should start having smaller portion sizes, or maybe you should, not go off and, eat 3 pizzas in the evening before you go to bed. There are things you can do, and it's very, very similar with finance. If you look at a lot of finance institutions go very quickly to this kind of idea of financial literacy. The reason why people can't save is because they don't understand how to do it. That's absolutely rubbish. Most people know exactly what they should do. They know they should pay off high interest debt before low interest debt. They know they should spend less than they make. But the problem is their belief systems, their underlying belief systems about money prevent them from doing that. They jeopardizes them from actually doing those kind of things. And of course, then it gets into this very nasty cycle where, especially with financial literacy, a lot of financial literacy is kind of laid out in a very simple way because they want it to be easily digestible. Yes. And what happens is you get this negative feedback loop where that simplistic advice, just make a budget, you think to yourself, well, I can't even do that, so I must be a total failure. And then it becomes this kind of negative feedback loop, and people, in the same way that people do with their weight and with other issues, they kind of spiral into this negative feedback loop, and they just think. And this is what we found when we were doing the original research for this app, this outpouring of just kind of frustration and nihilism about finance and just like, oh, I'm useless, everybody else is great. And of course, it's just not true. Very, 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 very few people have a perfect relationship with money. It's an endemic problem that we're facing.
Yeah, I just don't see anybody else taking it on as Stackin is taking it on. And having signed up for that app myself, just being with even the questions or the prompts, I could see I was in contraction and a resistance to them. And I was like, oh, the first day I signed up, I was like, do I want to be with these questions today? It's a busy day. It's a heavy day. But that is what is so fascinating about it, is the resistance shows up even in the conversation, even in the thought process of it, because you're starting to, at least for me, when I took it, I was going to have to start to be with some hard questions and face some things. And let me say this, I have read hundreds of books on finance and our relationship to money. Like, I'm not anybody who's brand new to this topic, and yet even I was being triggered. So I thought, oh God, what's going to happen to those people who have never? The first book I ever read was a book called The Instant Millionaire by, I think it was M.K. Fisher. And at the time I was looking up to work at Borders, and that bookstore put these books in my hands that made me realize, wow, this relationship to money is much deeper and much more survival based in our limbic system, as you guys talk about. So I'm kind of curious, what was it that appealed to you the most about putting this focus out there for people?
Well, it kind of came about, as all this stuff does, actually started off, let me back up a bit and talk a little bit about how we got to this point. So the business, as I said previously, was effectively a media company. I got introduced to the business actually by one of its investors, Howard Lindzen. I came on board, and at that stage, it was a media business that was putting out these videos, and it started to get like inbound emails that were coming in from people, and just comments on the bottom of the videos of people saying, I've been left like $5,000 by my gran. What should I do with it? And of course, originally the business was just like, well, I don't know, we just make videos. It's not, But there was this kind of light bulb, the first light bulb that went off, which was like, hold on a minute, these people are asking us, which is probably because they don't have anybody else to ask, right? So that was the kind of first realization, was like, okay, there's a requirement for kind of, in those days, we thought it may have been financial access or financial advice. And we know why all that's happened. If you look at the high street, bank branches are closed everywhere. If you're not on one of the coastal cities, it's very hard to kind of find the natural places where you would go to find financial information have just evaporated, and we know that now. And so the first thing we did was we wanted to build a communication channel between ourselves and that audience. And so what we did is we built a text messaging platform. And what we said was, give us your cell phone number and we will send you 2 to 3 money tips a week. And we built that business up to we had about 1.3 million subscribers in 2019. And the way that business worked, we'd send you money tips, we'd give you advice about investing, that kind of stuff. And every once in a while, we would, if you showed an interest in, for instance, savings or something, we would give you a referral to a product. The business did very well. And at the end of 2019, we raised a large round of finance. And then COVID happened in 2020, and the referral market and that whole business just stopped. And so, at that stage, we kind of spent a bit of time like trying to work out whether it was something we were going to try to build out a bit more or fix and do those kind of things. But we always knew that we wanted to build a much deeper relationship with our audience, with our users. And so what we did was we actually just thought, hold on a minute, we've got 1.3 million Americans, cell phone numbers effectively, right? We've got we're in a very good position. We've got a huge amount of cash on the balance sheet. Let's take the time now to actually just start talking to people and actually asking them, see whether some of our hypotheses that we have about money are right. So the first thing we did was, we went into I remember it clearly. We started speaking to people, and the first obviously assumption we had was, okay, this is all about access. The reason why people can't hit their financial goals, they can't reach their objectives, is because they don't have access to the right tools. We were dissuaded of that very, very quickly. It was like everybody had like brokerage accounts, crypto. I mean, we had people with 3 crypto accounts who had no idea what to do with crypto, but just were like, I'd open these accounts, I don't know what I'm doing. So the idea about access was just like, no, it's a misnomer. The second thing we thought was, the second hypothesis was like, okay, well, if it's not about access, it's got to be about literacy. And obviously this is a common thing, financial literacy programs, blah, 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 blah. But again, as I said earlier, as we dug into this, that was just not the case. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do with money. They all knew they were supposed to pay off high interest debt, spend less than whatever. But what actually happened was there was this kind of just outpouring of like, you do a conversation like this with a user, and within about 2 minutes, it would just be this like outpouring of just emotional like frustration and, oh my God, I'm rubbish and money. Like everybody else is like buying houses. I'm just stuck. I don't know what I'm doing. And it would just come up time and time again. And it would become, within about 10 minutes of the conversation, you'd almost be having a therapy session. The person would be saying, look, it's not that bad. It's okay. It's fine. We're all like this. And they'd be like, are they? And that was really when the kind of light bulb went off. And so the realization was that, like, hold on a minute, this isn't a finance crisis. This is a health crisis. Yeah. And I think for us, that was the point that we realized, okay, we're onto something here. And so that kind of inquisitive, like, meander through just talking to people, we'd uncovered this, okay, these people, they're not struggling with access. They're not struggling with literacy. What they're struggling with is their kind of, effectively their mental health around money, their actual, this relationship that they have with this thing, money themselves. Yeah. And at that stage, we then went deep into kind of product development phase. We did, I've got a great team in the business. Sam, who's VP of strategy, he did a fantastic job. He pulled in Megan Ford, who's the creator of the Ford Financial Empowerment Model. She was at the University of Georgia. And Amanda Clayton, who's heading this kind of financial therapy, which is a kind of emerging field in therapy. And we just started reading all the financial literature. I bought the top 25 financial advice books on Amazon, sat down and read them, and started to realize that there was just this massive gap between, what you said there, these kind of traditional, popular financial advice books, and actually what people needed, which was this much more like, a real kind of analysis of their existing mindset. Like, what, why can't I stick to a budget? That was a question that kept coming. I make a budget, I can't stick to it. Right. And it's like, okay, well, and they would beat themselves up. They would be like, it means I'm a loser, I can't. And it's like, first of all, stop doing that. Stop telling yourself you're a loser, because it's just not true. We all struggle, okay, with this stuff. And then really kind of starting to unpack, like, okay, what are the features and the tools that we can do to kind of help people get through this kind of these mental blockers that they have about it. So we started, having done all the research, going into product development mode, we started doing a lot of work around, we started doing one-on-one coaching sessions like this. Yep. And we started to introduce concepts which had then ended up in the app. So we did a concept around journaling. We just said to people, this was a fascinating thing to watch. We would take a user who was struggling with compulsive spending. Okay, they would be continually compulsively spending. And we say to them, right, all I want you to do for the next 10 days, I just want you to journal, okay, write down at the end of your day, your experience with money that day, okay, your relationship, how you felt, how it made you feel, that kind of stuff. And within 10 days, they would totally stop compulsive spending, like just instantly stop. Because the mechanism of like actually facing up to that, when they would find they would be in the mall, or they would be, at a place where they were traditional online, and they would be thinking, I'm going to buy this stuff, they would then recognize that, hold on, in a very short period of time, I'm going to have to write about this, and I'm going to have to analyze how I feel about this. Right. And, I'm not going to feel great, because, as soon as I buy that, as soon as I spend that $600 on whatever it is, the enjoyment quickly dissipates. So that was the first year. We also did stuff as well. We did, which is ended up in the app. We asked users to rate their transactions. We said, look, we want you every single day, we want you to take some time just to rate your transactions, not by the amount, not by the merchant where you bought it, but literally just how it made you feel. And this was for users who came to us and said, oh, I feel like I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And we'd say, okay, right, just for the next week, I want you to rate how every transaction you spent of your discretionary income, this is income that you can control, how it made you feel. And what we would find is 40% of users, 40% of the transactions of these users that they said that they had complete control over didn't make them feel good. They actually made them feel frustrated. Like, oh, I went out for a drink with this person, but I don't really like them. And I bought this and I don't know why I bought it. And so at the end of the week, we'd be able to say, look, you feel like you're living paycheck to paycheck, but 40% of the stuff that you control in your money that you're spending doesn't make you feel good. So before you even start thinking about setting a budget, just start spending more money on things you like and less on things you don't like. Yes. And it was kind of, it was these kind of like processes that we did. So we did a lot of this work. We also did, which was really interesting, we did kind of group coaching calls. We brought friends together. that was fascinating because, we'd have a conversation, and because a lot of people wanted to just talk about money. They didn't have anyone they could talk to. They couldn't talk to their friends. They couldn't talk to their family because they thought that all their friends were doing so much better than they were. Their family, just couldn't relate because it's like different generational things. So we bring people together and we do coaching calls with them. And it would be fascinating because, about 5 minutes into the conversation, one of them would say, God, I'm really bad with money. And their friend would go, are you? Well, so am I. And then there would just be this like hallelujah moment where everyone's just like, my God, that's awesome to say. I'm rubbish with it. And it would be just like, yes, everyone is like, don't believe what you see on, Instagram or whatever. It just isn't true. Like everyone is struggling with this.
Totally.
And so kind of rebasing that stuff. So, that's where, and then about kind of 6 months ago, we really started piling all of that into the app. And that's what, we launched it on the 1st of July. It's got those core features in there. We're going to bring out a lot more in the next couple of months. And, we think it's a huge opportunity. We think that, what Noom is doing for people's relationship with food, we can do for people's relationship with finance, because we think it's endemic. There are more people in the US suffer from money anxiety than suffer from obesity. So, it is just an endemic issue.
It's a staggering number. And yet I have the evidence just in the 15 years that I've been doing this coaching. There's nobody who doesn't have to take a hard look at what that relationship is. But part of what I feel stops them is the shame attached to it. And so it's really hard to take a hard look at your relationship to money if you feel ashamed, like all those people were like shocked that other people in the room felt they were bad at money. And that's part of why it keeps everybody hiding it or not talking about it, because the stigma of I'm the only one who doesn't have a perfect relationship with money. It's like, no, you are actually much more, everybody struggling in some way. But
you do. And I think so, I think social media has increased that. I think that there's a huge tendency. I've had a background in professional finance as well, and it always makes me laugh. Some of the most successful people I've ever worked with, will celebrate their worst trades more than they will ever their best trades. And they'll laugh at themselves, and they'll have the humility to recognize that the idea that in any way you can understand how this very complicated world works is ridiculous. And when you get it right, fantastic, but most of the time you get it wrong. And I think when I look now, especially at how young people kind of take to this stuff, they're learning all the wrong lessons. It's all about like trying to show, well, I figured it all out, and I think this is all a symptom of a broken relationship that people have with money and finance. And to really progress, and if you want to genuinely hit your financial goals, you have to fix that. You're always going to struggle. And it's interesting, in a lot of our research, we tend to find this comes to an head at an inflection point. What tends to happen is either it happens when people are kind of in their mid-20s, when they've kind of gone through the period of they've been partying all the time, it's been great, they come out of college and they don't care because they're just spending everything. And then suddenly, either somebody in their friendship group gets married, or maybe somebody puts a deposit down the house, and there's a kind of awakening of like, oh my God, I'm like months, years away from being able to do that.
Yeah.
Or the second inflection point is actually when people become settled down together, and there's this combination of finance, and it's really interesting. Like people who are very much in love suddenly bring their finances together, and it's like a flashpoint. It's like, you did what? And we had people that we would talk to who, there was one guy who's, I always remember this is a fantastic interview. He didn't have a huge amount of savings, but he was okay, and he was like a kind of a money avoider. He was somebody who just didn't really think it was important. He wasn't really bothered about it.
Yeah.
And he needed help to kind of like engage with money more, understand. He needed to open his bills. He needed to understand more about like, okay, you want to get from here to here. This is, you're going to need to engage with money to make that stuff happen. And his girlfriend, his longtime partner, she had $50,000 in her checking account. Okay, no, not savings account, $50,000 in checking account. She earned maybe like 140, something like that, and she got a speeding ticket, and it was like $110. And he came home from work, and she was literally like hyperventilating on the sofa. And he was like, what's happened? I got a speeding ticket. And he was thinking, well, like what? Like, is it? Yeah, how much? And she's like, it's like $110. And he was like, oh my God. And then he realized like her issue is a money hoarder. She hoards money,
Yeah.
right? And any sense of dent into the money that she's hoarded feels like a personal failure. And so those two, those two relationships, those two individuals, those two belief systems coming together was just a huge friction point. And, you see it time and again where, they have to then work together to kind of understand, okay, I understand what's driving his view and I understand what's driving my view in that regard.
Definitely. And just having this, how can we show sensitivity to our partner's relationship to money if we haven't examined our own relationship to money? Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us the descriptors? The one that came up for me, of course, I resisted it at first, but then I was like, yes, this is true. And also one of the gals on my team, she answered the questions first on my behalf. And unfortunately, that's what she got. And I was ticked off. So I was like, I'm going to take it again. But then, of course, I got it too. And I was like, shit, she really knows me. She's kind of my COO. So I was just like, oh, man. But that description specifically said, if you're going to probably have that label or identification, if you had a negative change in your family's financial circumstance when you were a child. Mm-hmm. So tell us about the types that people potentially could be, just an overview so people have a sense of what they might themselves be.
Sure. So the important thing to say before I start is everybody has all of these beliefs in there, but depending on effectively that very early experience you've had around money, whether you grew up with a family that was very poor, or maybe your parents didn't discuss money at all, or whatever it was, that will push one of those beliefs forward in your psyche. And also, as you kind of go through life and you pick up experiences, that also pushes those beliefs up and down. So at any one time, people can be exhibiting a specific belief, but that can change over time. And it's not that I've only got one belief and these other ones I don't have any connection with. It is a kind of more mix of it. So the four beliefs effectively, the one I think that you were referring to is to romanticize money. This is to kind of is to have an attachment to money that is perhaps a bit more beyond what money is, right? So money, we always say to people, at the end of the day, money is just a tool. Okay, it's something that you have that you can do that ultimately allows you to do what you want to do with it. Okay, it's not in itself a be all and end all. And most of the time when you see people who talk about being a millionaire, for instance, what they actually mean is they mean to spend $1 million. They don't actually mean to have $1 million, right? And so people who kind of tend to romanticize it will put money above other enjoyments around, whether it's time with their families or things like that. They'll chase things which are effectively a reflection of that kind of that belief that money is all that matters. It is the be all and end all, and it can come from people if you've grown up in a very poor household. It can also come if you come in a very wealthy household and you just idolize that kind of approach to that in that regard. The second belief is a reflective. So this is for somebody who kind of believes that money reflects status, right? So it could be that you see that having money, having nice clothes, having nice things is really, really important because that speaks to who you are and it tells other people who you are. And we see this a lot with people who, especially, and of course with the advent and the proliferation of social media, you see this a lot. People running up significant amounts of credit card debt because they believe that if they have that car or they have that set of clothes or whatever it is, that it tells the rest of the world that they are successful, and therefore it reflects on them in that regard. The third we talk about is evasive. Money is an evasive money belief. This is people who will choose to just have nothing to do with money at all. They don't want to. They believe that, and it could be driven by the fact they believe money is evil. Money is the root source of evil. It could just be that they don't really have an interest in it. These are people who tend to not open their credit card statements. They don't open their bank. They don't want to look at their bank balance, and they actually actively will just avoid any interaction with money. So it can be things like one of the exercises we do with people who exhibit this belief is, we just get them first of all just to open their credit card statement. Don't even look at it. Just get into the habit of when it arrives, open it, put it on the table, right, and then you work into the basis of okay, now you open it. Now we want you to just look at it. You don't have to pay it. We're not, and it's just a process where it takes a couple of weeks and sometimes months to get people comfortable to the fact that okay, I'm now engaging I don't feel that kind of trepidation, that kind of stuff. And then the fourth type is what we call kind of protective. So these are people like I just gave you that example of that lady who will literally punish themselves to hold money. And you see this, you can come through a lot with people who've got this kind of, sometimes you read about people who, this kind of financial independence, retire early, movement. Not saying that all those people exhibit this, but it's people who, will give up large parts of their happiness just to retain money at all costs, because they feel, again, it could be that they've either been bequeathed money from their family and therefore they feel that they have to protect it and it's being drummed into them, this is money that's come down generationally. Or equally, it could be that they've grown up in a very poor household where the money has, there's nobody around, and now they just feel like they have to hold on to it. And you find this a lot with people who, and I worry about this sometimes in the way that kind of financial media describes, like, how well you should save for your house. Well, maybe, but if you're in your 20s, you also need to enjoy your life, because you only get your 20s or your 30s once, right? And I think it's a balance. And so you find a lot of people can get very, very very kind of driven around this kind of protective stuff. So those are the four beliefs as we kind of summarize them.
I love them, and I do agree that probably all four show up in different ways, just even as you were describing them. I think what's fascinating is that, at least if you're conscious of those terminologies or that kind of behavior, you're just going to start to see it more frequently. What would you say would be just, if you could have one mindset shift around people's relationship to money, what would you like to see that be?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I think actually the first step is people to recognize that they have a relationship with money. I know that might sound a little bit kind of bit too pithy, but we have relationships with things, right? We have, we said before that Numa's done a fantastic job of illustrating that people have relationships with food, and of course we have relationships with people and that kind of stuff. And every relationship needs work. We all know that. And as you get older, you learn those lessons, and you have to put more effort into stuff around those things. And I think that for people, like many people don't see that they have a relationship with money. They just think it's just, it's money. So it's like, I get it and I spend it and it comes to, and it's like, no, that's just not true. You do have and I think like the first thing I would ask for anyone to think about is to ask themselves the question, like, what is my relationship with money? Like what and I think that is like a really, and I think, what you said earlier about when you started using the app and you're like, oh God, I don't know whether I'm kind of ready to start answering some of these questions yet. And I think for a lot of things, that's what we want you to do. We want you to kind of go away and think, yeah, actually, these are asking some really quite profound questions about my relationship with money, which I probably know, like, because the reason you don't want to answer them is not because you can't answer them. It's because you probably do know the answer, but it's deep down there, and you kind of need to kind of go away and prepare yourself. Like, I'm gonna have to front up a lot of this stuff to myself that I've probably avoided for a long period of my life. Exactly. And again, we find this the same with. It's interesting as you speak to people who have got more wealth or higher incomes. What you find is like the issues are exactly the same, but they just managed to obscure them. And what you tend to find is if they have a bad financial event, if something negative happens to them, they absolutely collapse, because all of that wealth and income goes away, and suddenly those really bad issues are they're unresolved, and they become it becomes very acute. So I think, like, I would just ask, where we are right now, I think, is just people to recognize that they have a relationship with it, and they should go away and just really think about what that relationship is. Where does it come from? Because it will help them start to understand why they behave like they do.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things is, as I was, looking in experiencing the app, answering the questions, and just being present once again to my own relation to money with this whole experience with your app. One of the memories that came from me was, because of my parents getting divorced at an early age, I was experiencing with my dad's kind of, new family, a very different financial lifestyle. I was very wealthy. And I can remember just enjoying, like, they had an outdoor pool and a cabana, and it was just like, oh my God, a kid's, dream come true. But one of the memories that came up for me was I wasn't letting myself fully enjoy that because I felt guilty because my mother wasn't experiencing it. And
Yeah.
that became this like aha moment for me, that there's a part of me probably still that holds it at arm's length, as if I don't have a right to have this because somebody else doesn't.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really important point. That's the, I think that's like, those stories are so much more present than you would think, and we did probably over 250, 260 hours worth of user interviews to kind of come up with this. And, those stories, those kind of issues where people for the first time, like, admit to themselves, God, I've been carrying this around with me for, like, and if it's people in their 20s, like 5 years, and if it's people in their 40s, it's 20 years.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'd say is, and I wrote about this in one of the posts, what we ended up actually really out of a lot of the user research is, I wanted to try and frame the kind of concept that we have in a kind of framework. And one of the things I wrote about, if you visit my profile on LinkedIn, you'll see it's up there, is we talk about what we realized was that we had to put a kind of prism over how people's financial situation changed, right? And so what we did was we took the lens of volatility, and this is, I think, probably where some of your audience will probably understand this a little bit more through this prism. So what we did is we said, okay, if you think about somebody's financial situation as it is right now, okay, and there are positive and negative changes that happens to everyone's financial situation. Maybe on the negative side, on the left-hand side of the distribution, you'll have people, they lose their job, maybe they get an unexpected medical bill, those kind of things, right? And there's quite a bit of work built around how to kind of, how to insulate yourself from that in a professional term, how to hedge that, your exposure to that volatility on the left tail. And you obviously have, there's credit facilities, there's build-in emergency savings, all this kind of stuff. But when we did this, what we realized is that there's actually a right tail, and the right tail is about people getting this kind of positive financial experiences. So what you just talked about there, okay, if you carry this guilt around with you about positive financial experiences, okay, what happens is you find that these people are really, really unprepared for when positive financial things happen to them. And by the way, they happen to everybody all the time,
Yes.
far more than people
Yes.
expect, right? People get wage rises, bonuses, stimmy checks, all these things happen. And what we realized is through doing this was that if people are unprepared for those events, they don't maximize them. They just effectively they just dissipate away. And actually, as we got into this more, we realized that actually there's a huge element of kind of social inequality around this. That if you why do people, again, one of the reports I was commenting on recently is about, there's been a fantastic study around the fact that, they did an analysis of children who came from underprivileged backgrounds, underprivileged zip codes in the US, and they compared them to other kids who came from the same backgrounds. And some of these people, went on to become successful and wealthy and that stuff, and the majority of the others didn't. And they tried to work out what the correlation was. And the biggest correlation was the fact that these kids just hung out with wealthy friends. That's effectively all it was. Wow. And what that did was that got lodged in their belief system, right? They understood because they were around the people who had money and experienced positive financial change. Yeah. They had the mechanism, the skills that when it happened to them, they could maximize it, right? Yeah. And the other kids from the same background had exactly the same opportunities, but they just had never been surrounded by people who could understand how to maximize those financial possibilities. Yeah. And I think, if you think about it that way, if you think about those two tails in that distribution, yes, we're about making sure that you have that resilience to suffer those negative financial shocks, but you also need to have the mental preparedness to take advantage of the positives when they happen. One of my all-time favorite stats for this is, if you win the lottery in the US, you're more likely to go bankrupt than if you don't. And that just speaks to the point. It's this, the idea that these people, if you're not prepared, you have to be mentally prepared for these positive financial changes to happen. Yeah. And I think, you see this with, and I'm sure some of your audience will relate to this. Lots of people, when they get their first bonus or they get their first, significant increase in salary or whatever it is, they don't maximize it. It gets frittered away on the holidays, fast cars, whatever it is, rather than them taking advantage of it. And of course, then, a couple of years down the line, they get a negative shock, and what could have been, their nest egg or could have been their cushion has passed them by.
But if you're feeling guilty for having received it in the first place because you haven't reconciled those old stories, then you are going to fritter it away because you want to get yourself back to homeostasis and not feel bad. And when my first, foray into finance was in a hedge fund, and I was being compensated very generously. And the first bonus that I got, it was so big that I remember we had a conference out in Arizona, and I signed up for an equine coaching experience. It's one of the, I still didn't even know about coaching, but I had that experience, and I brought that to my session. Was the lifestyle shift for me was so extreme that I felt ill-equipped to navigate it. And I remember after that session with her that day, I drove from Arizona to California. So it was like a 5-hour trip. And I cried the entire time in a cathartic way, because that session allowed me to start to be like, it's okay to have this much money. It's okay to have my lifestyle shift. And I saw all that guilt then too, like, do I deserve this? Am I worthy of this? Blah, blah, blah. But that just taught me, whoa, if this good stuff feels hard to be with, isn't that going to prevent other good stuff, me letting other good stuff in, or financial abundance in?
Exactly. And this is why, we when people, read about the stuff that we're working on, a lot of the time we get questions, well, isn't this just like what financial advisors do? And it's like, no, it's completely different. We're in this kind of emergent field of financial therapy, and it really sits in between. Financial advisors can tell you, if you go to a financial advisor and say, well, I've got $100,000 bonus, okay, and I want to do something with it, but I feel really guilty, and I feel like I've got all these big. They're going to say, well, look, I can help you, put a portfolio together, but I can't deal with your guilt or any of that stuff, right? And if you go to a therapist and you say, look, I've got 100, but I got all this guilt, they can say, well, I can help you with the guilt, but I can't put a portfolio together, right? So what you have is this kind of thing that falls in between these two stools, where people, and increasingly, this kind of social isolation that we have by, everything now is intermediated through this device. We don't have these kind of very human interactions where people can just literally break down and say, look, I'm struggling, or I don't really know what I'm doing, or I don't know, I've just been given the largest amount of money I've ever been given in my life, and I'm in floods of tears. I don't know why am I feeling like this? And I think like there's just a huge demand for this out here that basically prepares people for both the negative and the positive things that are going to happen in their lives, so that they can come to somebody and say, look, I don't know why I'm feeling like this. I should be feeling happy, but I don't feel happy. Or I don't, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. And so that's a lot of the stuff that we've done.
Exactly. The other question that I just wanted to make sure I speak to is, what could people keep? How could they specifically keep an eye out for the symptoms? What are the symptoms that someone has a bad, I don't want to even say bad relationship, but costly,
unhealthy? Yeah, I'd say so. It's exactly. There's lots of them. I mean, you see them all. I mean, I can go through, whether it's compulsive spending, whether it's, even an inability. If you feel, we kind of put a lot of things under the umbrella of just money anxiety. If you feel anxious about money, whether that is, whether it can be all the way to like, I can't sleep at night. It can be just like, I don't feel like I'm in control. A lot of people come to us and say, I feel like my money controls me. I don't control my money, right? And that's like a common thing. And that can be like, yes, compulsive spending. It can be even, I'm not going out. Like, I'm just going to stay in for the entire month, not see any friends. But I'm doing that because I feel like I'm serving a master rather than doing this kind of stuff. So I think like anything where you're aware that your money is having an impact on you, living your life the way you want to live it, all the way through to having really quite, behaviors where you are. I mean, there's a lot of people we talk to, and a lot of the kind of key symptoms come out. Obviously, I can't go into those specific topics, but there are, we see a lot of behaviors where a lot of the common stuff that you have, whether it's, people looking for, comfort in retail therapy, being able to, trying to stick to a budget, but just continually blowing out the budget, struggling to kind of, not opening bank statements, not opening credit card statements, all the way through to people feeling like they're on top of stuff, but just, not feeling like they want to get to where they want to get to. We have people who have these goals, and they'll say to themselves, I want to do this by the time I'm X. Okay, and by the way, just on that point, whenever we talk to people whenever we talk to our users about goals, it's very interesting, because the first set we have to ask them twice. The first time we ask them, they all say, "Oh, I want to buy a house, I want to get married, whatever." And then you say, "Okay, fine. I know that's what you think we want to hear, but what do you actually want to do? Like, really?" And you get like people saying things like, "I want to go to Antarctica by the time I'm 30. Brilliant. Okay, that's something you really care about. Okay, but they'll immediately say afterwards, "But it's not possible. It's just not going to happen." Okay, and you'll say, "Well, why? You're 25. It's 5 years away. Why is it not possible?" And they're like, "Oh, it's never going to happen." And then you kind of sit down with them and you say, "Okay, well, look, let's work it out. How much is it going to cost? It's going to cost, $5,000. Okay, well, that's 5 years away, so $1,000 a year. It's like 80 something bucks a month to save. You can't save it, And then they're like, "Oh no, I could do that." And it's like, well, right. And so there's this kind of, a lot of people, the symptom is also just people either almost not wanting to vocalize or face up to what they really want to do with their money. Like, what would make me happy? Okay, I'm doing this job. I've always told myself since a kid I wanted to, go to the Andes, or go to Europe, or whatever it is. And I don't vocalize it. I don't put it. It's in the back of my head, but I don't write it down. I don't work a plan out, because I don't want to disappoint myself. I don't want to upset myself by that stuff. So there's all those kind of symptoms as well. So I think it's that, everyone who listening to this will probably will probably reflect on that and think, "Oh yeah, there's a part of me that's this, or there's part of me that's that." And I think those are all signs that, you're not in control of your money. Your money is in control of you. It's having an impact on your emotions. It's having an impact on your anxiety. And these are things that can all be solved. You just have to start on that basis of understanding that you've got a relationship with money, understanding what it is, and then start working on how you can fix it.
Yeah, beautifully said. And that's what you just shared. Is I remember vividly, before I got that job in that hedge fund, I went to St. John in the US Virgin Islands, thanks to the generosity of a few friends. And when I left that island, and I didn't do every water sport everybody else did, but I had such a great time that when I got on the plane after that trip, I made a promise to the island that I would be back on my own dime, first class, in 1 year. So I had to make that happen, which was switching positions. And that's when, I found myself in a very different level. But that concept, I just remember, how is this going to happen? I had to look at well, I can't do it at this salary. I'm going to have to make a higher salary. And just looking at that truth and making that decision unfolded a different future that probably wouldn't have happened for a bunch of years if I didn't feel that fire inside my belly over it. And that's what I feel the app is really advocating. Start to tune in to what that fire in your belly is, and don't be so cynical that maybe you can't accomplish it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And I think, just recognize that, we all, as we go through life, so we have this tendency to believe everything will stay the same as it currently is. I either I'm going to earn the same amount of money, or I'm going to carry on living. My example I always give, like in March 2020, a bunch of very young people were living in these small shoebox apartment in London or New York, because they use the city as their kind of their lounge, and they never thought that they would ever have to be stuck inside a shoebox apartment every day for And then COVID hit, and the way to kind of see that in a financial sense, the way I look at it is taking that mindset, or having that mindset about the fact of this kind of constant stasis, is that you're effectively short volatility. You're selling vol, right? And and we do that all the time. We whether it's we maybe drink a bit too much alcohol, or we eat too much fatty food, or we drive a little bit too fast, right? And the great thing about selling volatility, as anyone who sells vol knows, is you get paid. You get paid a little bit every single time, right? And maybe driving a little bit too fast, you get somewhere quicker, right? And drinking too much beer is good fun, right? So you go and do it. But at some point, right, selling vol catches up with you. And and this is how I think about it in a finance sense. If you kind of presume that you're going to stay on this road, and nothing significantly bad is going to happen to you and nothing significantly good is going to happen to you, you're effectively short volatility, right? And if you don't, and to get to the other side of that trade, you have to basically put the work in. You have to buy volatility. You have to make a payment, and that payment is you've got to go to the gym, you've got to stop drinking so much beer, you've got to drive the speed limit. But the benefit is that when something changes, you're in a much better position because you put yourself in that position. And I think, especially for finance people, if they think about this, the concepts of what we're doing, what we're talking about here, which is like, look, you have to put the work in now, right? When you're in a position that if you put this off too long, what will happen is volatility will catch up with you. Yeah. You will find yourself that your financial situation changes either for the positive or for the negative.
Yes.
And you won't have the underlying mentality, the underlying relationship that will help you either negate the negatives or take advantage of the positive. And that for us is,
you won't have the stomach for it. You won't have the muscle built to withstand the pressure. Good or the positive or the negative pressure, you won't have what it takes. And it's heartbreaking because the earlier you do that and reconcile whatever that childhood imprint is around money, your whole life could look different just by taking that look. And that's what I feel Stackin does. It is truly financial. It's an advocacy for financial wellness, and it's bringing it into our day-to-day moments. And that, I think, it's going to be game-changing for countless people, Tom. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. We're absolutely. I mean, we think it's we see it as a mission. It's for us very much a we believe that this is an endemic issue, and we feel strongly that it needs to be dealt with, and we can affect the lives, we can change the lives of millions and millions of Americans. So we are very, very proud to be on it and pushing forward. I wanted to just say one last thing, actually, just about that. The term financial wellness is used by lots of different organizations, and I think sometimes it gets a bit hijacked. So we do feel that financial wellness is important, but the way that we think about it is that to get to a point where you feel financially well, you have to. It's both both the kind of emotional and mindset side as well as the finance side. Lots of people will solely focus on the finance side. A lot of traditional finance says, right, all the emotional stuff we're just going to ignore because it's too complicated, and we're just going to focus on this bit here, right? And it's completely impossible. Humans, you cannot. The greatest parts about humans are their emotions, and so asking people to ignore those emotional things just never, ever, ever works. And I think for me, like when I hear financial wellness, I always want to go and look and see, okay, if this has nothing to do with mindset or emotions or what the things that actually drive people, that get people up in the morning, that you do stuff, if it doesn't have that, it's never going to succeed. And I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. You're preaching to the choir. This is what I talk about all the time, and I'm always saying, like, if you just think it's about, certainly with traders and even for investors, they think it's all about the strategy. And I'm like, that strategy is only going to be of value if you find out what those dragons are in the basement of who you are, because those are driving your bus, not your freaking strategy. It'd be great if you could just be so completely, would it be great? That's what I say. I'd be nice. They say, oh, it'd be great if I could just cut myself off from my emotions. I'm like, no, you would be a robot. You would not be a human being.
And it doesn't work. I mean, because this is, again, if you come back to our point, when we talk about these belief systems, recognizing you have a relationship with money is important. And recognizing the fact that is an emotional relationship is really important. Like if you think, well, the solution to this is to effectively become an android and just have no relationship, well, then you're just giving over control again to money. You're saying, well, so the money rules my world. The only way I can deal with money is through being completely emotionless. So I'm just going to cut myself off completely. that's crazy. You have to take back control. It's, this is about you. There's a very good book, which I'm sure you've read, by Morgan Housel, called The Psychology of Money.
Yes.
He goes into this in a lot of detail. It's very, very, lots of great anecdotes about this kind of like, he's got fantastic anecdotes about how people who, are exceptionally successful investors, how they've harnessed their emotions, harnessed their, not taken that mindset of kind of, well, I have to turn into a robot to be able to analyze this stuff, how to actually understand what they're effectively, a lot of the stuff that we're putting forward here, understand what their underlying beliefs are, understand what their emotional drivers are, recognize their own relationship they have with finance, and then recognize how that drives. It can be used it can obviously be used as a disadvantage, but how it can be used as an advantage. And I think, if people who are very wealthy and very successful investors like that can do it, everyone can do it.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you. I asked you at the start of this if maybe you would do a part 2 at some point, because I want to have this conversation keep happening, because the more aware people become to the fact that this relationship is the foundation, it's the foundational block of everything else. Certainly relationships, especially if you have a partner whose relationship to money is very different from yours, that is definitely going to get in the way, not only if you financially co-creating a future together, but the emotional costs that are going to come. And I've seen that in coaching as well, where, the client talks about their partner feeling very different than them. And I'm like, you can't ignore that. You got to pull that apart. What's yours? What's hers or his? Like, figure it out. So anyway, just thank you for coming on here. Thank you for creating Stackin. I can't wait to see how many lives do change from it. So my life has already changed from it. So thank you, Tom. Thank you for coming on my podcast, and hopefully we'll have you back.
Absolutely, Kim. Okay. Thanks a lot. Okay.
This has been the Wall Street Coach Podcast with Kim Ann Curtin. You can find out more about her and her team online at thewallstreetcoach.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.